So we're on the junction of Oxford Street and Panton Street in SW1 to look at a pub which is named after a fascinating man. Tom Cribb was basically the governor in the 1800s. And what do I mean by the governor? Basically, he was the bare-knuckle boxing champion. He was basically known as the best at the end of his career, but he wasn't actually undefeated. He did suffer a loss in his early days. Now, British people were considered very brutal by much of Europe, because in Britain there was a very violent nature, and especially in the entertainment sector. Whether it was bullfighting, cockfighting, dogfighting, or human fist fighting, fighting was basically a major pastime for the average person in England, and this would happen in public houses or even in private venues where people would set this up via word of mouth. This is why when the Brits came to fight hand to hand against the French, maybe it's Napoleon's army or someone else's, they struggled, because most of the time the French were dominant because of their artillery. But as soon as the Brits, with their tenacious, vicious attitude, got up close, you saw the fruits of what it was like living and growing up in Britain. Now, if we look just up there, you can see Tom Cribb's plaque. Towards the end of his career, he didn't technically retire, he just retired from boxing. He then became a company owner, and one of his ventures was this public house, which today looks really nice. I love a good hanging basket. I think they're absolutely lovely, and you'll notice how the hanging baskets all have a great sense of similar colour coordination. I love the tiling, and I have to mention it's a Shepherd Neame pub, which is Britain's oldest running brewer. So there's an abundance of history just in this little shop here. So why don't we go up and read one of the other plaques, which will help me do my job and to help you better understand how important Tom Cribb was and how vicious the nature of Britain was. Today we look at professional boxing and everyone can just go to the box office, anyone's allowed to do it. It was an underground illegal activity which was still celebrated by even lawmakers. So it was this clandestine world that it was basically the country's best kept secret. So I'm going to have to do my best to protect my hair from the low hanging flowers whilst telling this story. And this plaque even mentions that before he became a boxer, he'd already served time in the Navy. I don't know whether he joined under his own will or he was press ganged or what, I don't know. I just know he was in the Navy, which was a very, very tough profession. Probably one of the toughest you could be in. So Tom Cribb was the British bare-knuckle boxing champion between 1809 and 1822, and had his first fight in 1805, Battle of Trafalgar, after returning from the Navy. Cribb became a coal porter at Wapping and was known by the nickname the Black Diamond. Now, that gives me a chance to quickly mention the fact that there was a few pubs, probably quite a few pubs, that held bare-knuckle fist fighting. Some of the ones you might know today that still exist would be the Prospector Whitby, which is at Wapping, which he may well have boxed at. You've got the Lamb and Flag in Covent Garden, known as the Bucket of Blood. That's one of the more famous ones. The Old Watling on Watling Street, and the Seven Stars. And these are some of the pubs that lay claim to being, or having been, bare-knuckle boxing venues. There would have been more, it's just most pubs, like many buildings, have disappeared off the face of the earth with no record. It's obviously where he got the name Black Diamond, because he was dealing in coal. It was using this ring name that Cribb won the first fight after 76 rounds. Now, why did boxing last for so long during the 17 and 18 and even parts of, dare I say, the 1900s? It's because boxing wasn't done how we know today. So today we recognise boxers as standing like this, the recognisable stance, because they're protecting their head, because they're wearing gloves. But the almost comedic images that we get from boxers in the past, they're standing like this, aren't they? Sort of standing like that. And there's a reason for this. It's because most of the shots would be towards your body, whether it's even shoulder, anywhere, chest, somewhere in the body. And we often wonder if modern boxers would make easy work of them. But technically, if they had to change their stance and fight in that style, they had the same handicap as if you put gloves on the people from the 17 and 1800s and said it's only headshots. So were they any worse than modern boxers? Most likely modern boxers are a lot better. I mean, obviously, but who knows? There's a huge chance that if you told a modern boxer to stand like that and fight one of the older boxers, he might have got done. So during the time that Cribb actually ran this pub, it was called the Union Arms, and it would have had an abundance of faces in it. Faces as in names. Names from the underground and people with official status. People loved Cribb, and now, having made a name for himself in the fight world, he could basically just reap the benefits of it with pretty much any company he started. But one of the boxers which is most famous as being both a rival and friend of his is Bill Richmond. And in the 1820s, Bill Richmond is alleged to have spent his last night here, the last evening of his life here, with the famous Tom Cribb. And as you can see, if you actually look up at the sign, you can see that stance I was talking about, can't you? And even there, he's got his hands quite high, or you could almost mistake him for a modern boxer there. But in reality, a lot of the time it was, as I said, it was like this. So it's not just that people were silly, there was an idea behind it, and that's why the fights lasted so long, because it was all body shots and you could take a lot more. They did punch each other in the face, but nothing like today. Bill Richmond made a massive name for himself, and he had a boxing gym right here. Obviously you know this place, anyone that recognises it, as Trafalgar Square, but it looks very different now to what it was a few centuries ago. During the era of Cribb, this place was nothing like it is today, and it was still what we called the King's Mews. This is where Westminster Palace used to be. There's only a few remnants of it, such as the old hall, the banqueting hall, where Charles I was led out before he was executed. This all came after the mews were demolished. So the palace burnt down in about the 1830s, which was the same time that Trafalgar Square was being built, because the Battle of Trafalgar had happened in 1805. So it took a while for them to get round to actually name it. It took a while to even pick the name Trafalgar Square, to be honest. There was a huge competition. And even Nelson's Column, which came later in the 1840s, there was big debate over that. And apparently this is just the one they chose. They weren't particularly proud of it, though us in London love it today, and it marks basically almost the centre of London, because that's what Charles I statue just over there is supposed to mark. You see on that roundabout there, for a long time that was marked as the centre of London, and anyone that recognises where you are, that's Whitehall Road. So this was a very important place. And if you just turn around so you recognise really where you are, there is the National Gallery, and up here was a beautiful building called Northumberland House, and it ran all the way up the street, all the way up Charing Cross Road, and it's because of Northumberland House that we have Northumberland Avenue. But that's not really why we're here, otherwise I'd be talking all day about the history of Trafalgar Square. What's fascinating is that Bill had his boxing gym right there. So among the ramshackles of huts and other makeshift buildings that were here was his boxing gym. Today, this is one of the most protected places in Europe, heavily over-policed. Before, this was almost like a suburb attached or nearby to Westminster. Westminster used to be very different. Believe it or not, there was actually rivers running round it as if a big moat. And today, as I said, there are actually only a few buildings left that were part of the old Palace of Westminster. Today's Palace of Westminster is what you recognise as the House of Commons, the House of Lords, you know, Elizabeth Tower, Big Ben, that fantastic Gothic building. But it used to be very different and stretched pretty much most of the way down what we today call Whitehall Road. So next time you're stood here looking at this monumental feature, which is impressive, we do love it, just stop and think that right there, in a place which is now a tourist hotspot, was where some of the gritty boxers of the day learnt their trade. Because Bill trained boxers. He opened his own gym after he felt he was too old to really make anything of himself in the ring. He did a great job against Cribb, but lost, but he had made a massive name for himself. And because he took it so well, the people loved him, and therefore he had a very successful gym here, which was demolished with everything else in order for us to have this. I find it fitting really that this place is a memorial to battle, to combat really, considering that's what this place was used to train people for. And now it's a memorial to a great battle in naval history, especially for Britain, in the Battle of Trafalgar. And even the art on it was actually made out of the cannons that were taken from the French, maybe even some of the Spanish, I'm not sure, during those battles. So it's incredibly symbolic in its violent nature. This spot here, in one way or another, whether it's domestic or foreign, has been entirely around violence and, dare I say, national security. So around the same time that Bill actually died, Cribb's retired for real, and he moved to Woolwich, where he would live out the rest of his life, and that's why today you can still see his grave at St Mary Magdalene Church. A man who basically beat the system and come out the other end with a few pound note to spare, all through fighting.